Energy, in the form of electricity, is the ever-beating heart of the modern world, and is the basis by which we make all industrial and domestic advances. In the last 100 years, the global consumption of energy in the form of fossil fuels and petroleum has become increasingly exorbitant. In the past decade, the world has become aware and concerned about the use of such energy-supplying resources, as they represent technological stagnation and pose a threat to the economy as well as the environment. Wind energy, specifically offshore wind, is considered to be one of the best fossil fuel alternatives and has been praised for its environmental and economic advantages. In 2001, Jim Gordon, CEO of Energy Management Incorporated, proposed Cape Wind, an offshore wind farm of more than 100 turbines in the beautiful and significant Nantucket Sound. Those who have disputed the proclaimed gospel of offshore wind found an ally in the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound, a non-profit organization also formed in 2001 that quickly became Cape Wind's leading opposition.
It's a project that has a lot of different aspects to it, whether you're talking about the claims by proponents of the project that it's a necessary step in order to combat climate change and global warming, that it's the first step in creating a new industry of offshore wind power off the coast of the United States, which doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form yet.
The Cape Wind project moved at a crawl for 14 years as Save Our Sound battered Energy Management Incorporated with lawsuits and accusations of potential environmental damage. As the two struggled, the community surrounding Nantucket Sound began to divide and feel the pressure of two entities contending for two very different outcomes. Jim Gordon has been a part of the energy business since 1975 and founded Energy Management Incorporated, which has become one of the most successful privately held independent power companies in America. Gordon is also the president of American Renewables, which is responsible for the development of two biomass-powered projects. Then, in 2000, he decided to sell all of the gas facilities and began to focus on the development of Cape Wind. The Cape Wind project has been proposed on Horseshoe Shoal in the Nantucket Sound, between the Cape and Martha's Vineyard. One of the most prolific fisheries in Nantucket Sound, this shallow stretch of water has become a treasured spot for fishermen and sailors alike. The reason the project has been cited here are also the issues that have made it controversial. In relatively shallow water, the site is close to the shore, and also to the people who use the electricity. This makes the wind farm easier to service and maintain, but also places it within sight of the shore. The project has achieved a number of important milestones thus far, including establishing and fully completing the federal and state permitting process, getting approval for construction and operations plan by the U.S. Department of the Interior, reaching a turbine supply agreement with Siemens, winning 17 separate legal decisions in challenges brought by opponents, reaching contractual funding agreements with Barclays Bank, the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, Pension Denmark, and the Export Bank of Denmark. The proposed installation would have an estimated output of 1,500 gigawatt-hours per year, which is enough to provide electricity to more than 100,000 average U.S. households. At peak production, the turbines would produce 90% of the power output of a typical coal-fired power plant in America, but the installation would only reach this level of output under ideal conditions. Currently, our electricity comes mostly from fossil fuels, predominantly from coal. Wind power accounted for 4.13% of total energy generation in the U.S. in 2013, far behind fossil fuels, though in some states, wind power accounts for as much as 25% of energy production. There are as of yet no offshore wind farms in the United States.
Then you have opponents of the project who say that Nantucket Sound, where Cape Wind wants to build this project, is just flat out not the right place to do it. They argue that Nantucket Sound is akin to the Grand Canyon, that it should be preserved as it is. There are fishermen who have come out against the project, being worried that it was going to take up an area where they have traditionally been fishing. There are people who are worried about the impact on bird life and who are worried about the impact on marine mammals. And all of those issues have come up during these various public hearings and public debates. They've come up in the pages of our newspaper, and people come down on one side or the other of most of these issues. There's concerns about navigation, safety. The Coast Guard has decided that the project should be allowed to go forward, but a lot of boaters and a lot of people who use Nantucket Sound for boating have raised concerns. There's been concerns raised about air travel. And so to boil it down into one issue or another is really difficult. If you took any one of those issues and approached them objectively, you might find, benefits or detriments from the project. There are some issues that have come up over time that have been fairly clear cut, and as a reporter, you look for those issues and you try and address those and present those to your readers so that they know what's a fact and what's not a fact.
The offshore wind farm is a complicated question. It's NIMBY. Nobody wants it in their backyard. However, if we want alternative energy, I think we're going to have to sacrifice something.
At the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the Integrative Graduate Education and Research Traineeship, or IGERT, is the backbone for research and scientific development regarding the future of offshore wind. The engineers and student fellows understand the science behind Cape Wind and have studied the project extensively.
Hi, I'm James Manuel, a professor of mechanical engineering here at UMass, director of the Wind Energy Center, also here at UMass. The turbines produce energy by the wind acts on the blades. It creates forces on the blades, which in turn produce torque in a main shaft. The main shaft goes at a relatively low speed, but then the output from the main shaft goes into a gearbox. The speed is increased. The output from the gearbox goes into a generator, electrical generator, that makes electricity. That goes into electrical cables, it goes down the tower, where there's usually a transformer, and then it's connected to the electrical network and out into the grid.
I'm Zara Dowling. I'm a graduate student in the Environmental Conservation Program at UMass, and we're both part of this offshore wind IGERT program that's funded by the National Science Foundation to kind of have an interdisciplinary approach to studying offshore wind power and kind of wind power in general. And my research is on bats.
My name is Rachel Coe, and I'm also a PhD student here at UMass. I'm in the mechanical engineering program. What I think of as wind turbines are three-bladed upwind horizontal axis wind turbines. That's like one really, really specific thing, and that's what we talk about because that's what leads the industry. The wind energy industry is not booming enough really to support different designs at this point. And so we've sort of narrowed ourselves into this one design that we do a lot of, but there are a lot of other ways that you can do a similar process. You also want to have your turbines close to where that electricity actually needs to be consumed, because you lose a lot of that power when you try to transmit it for long distances. So, one thought is, well, why don't we just pack them into the Midwest where it's these really, really rural landscapes and there's not a lot else going on. And the answer is that then you're not really that close to where that power is actually needed, where that electricity is actually needed. And that's another reason why offshore looks really good, is because you can get really close to these big cities that are on the east and west coasts. You're actually generating the power like pretty close to where that's actually used, which is why offshore is starting to look really good if we can get over some of these hurdles that we have.
There's sort of an infinite resource because you can always go out a little bit deeper if you can figure out how to make a floating turbine that has a reasonable cost. You can keep going offshore, and these are spots where if it's far enough offshore, people aren't going to see it. There are still going to be some issues with marine and wildlife.
Much of the animosity surrounding Cape Wind is related to the projected decrease in population for birds and bats who fly around Nantucket Sound. According to Save Our Sound, the 440-foot tall structures pose a hazard for several local species.
So most of the things that people talk about are problems with wildlife. So not so much, in terms of kind of larger environmental issues like habitat fragmentation, you are running roads out to these turbines, so there can be kind of issues with that. But the main issues are with wildlife, and it's mostly with, for onshore turbines, it's mostly with birds and bats, where sometimes they collide with the blades. So I study bats. The bats that most often get hit are migratory bats, which are these bats that actually fly south for the winter. And they've accounted for about 75% of mortality so far when people have been measuring it. There was a recent study that said that in 2012 they think about 600,000 bats were killed by turbines that year with just the capacity that we have, and obviously we're increasing our wind power capacity. So people are concerned about that. That's one issue, that figuring out a way to not have bats collide with turbines, which is something that I'm working on. In terms of other birds, raptors, there's been a lot of information about raptors getting hit, about eagles getting hit, and so that's something that people are working on. I think offshore, people aren't as sure what's going to happen with that, because there just haven't been as many offshore turbines. There aren't any in the US. We're not as sure how much it's going to affect species. It seems like, though, that a lot of the marine kind of waterfowl, like ducks and geese, they don't get hit as often. It's more an issue of displacement. The birds aren't going to go there. They're going to avoid that, and that means more energy to fly around it. It also means if that was a good foraging area, that's a problem. Right whales are a concern because they're endangered. If the sounds of construction are going to affect them, because they're not going to get like hit by the turbine being put in, but is that noise of construction going to be affecting them? And then fish and kind of crustaceans and all the stuff that lives under the water, we don't really know what the effects of those are going to be. Those are kind of a wide gamut of issues that exist
Yeah, there are a lot of
environmentally. But obviously there's a problem with global warming, which we'd like to address.
That's not really what I think of when I think of wind energy. I sort of think of this whole like culture and all these issues that exist around it. So I think that it's much more complicated than that.
I think they should find a place that is not as visible from the shore, and that may not have the environmental impact. I think putting a wind farm in Nantucket Sound goes against preserving the natural beauty of Cape Cod, which is a national treasure.
In the fight for beneficial renewable energy from offshore wind, some voices have become prominent. Combating Cape Wind to keep Nantucket Sound free of wind turbines is Audra Parker, president of the Alliance to Save Nantucket Sound.
This is ridiculous. This is unbelievable that a private developer could come in and take over what is a public resource, an area that draws millions of visitors each year. Nantucket Sound is the heart and soul, or the economic engine of the Cape and Islands, so I think a lot of outrage and just disbelief that a private developer was proposing this massive power plant in the middle of what many people consider as a national treasure.
Dr. Peter Sampu of the Sturgis Public Charter School disagrees with many of Save Our Sound's assertions and clarified the ecological significance of an offshore wind farm in Nantucket Sound.
I'm Dr. Pete Sampu. I'm a science teacher here at Sturgis Charter School. I have a PhD in oceanography. I sit on our local town conservation commission. I have contributed written comments to the Army Corps of Engineers. I've spoken in front of my town council on this subject matter. My position, based on a lot of background understanding on this, is that I am very much in favor of Cape Wind. In fact, I've already made the decision personally to have 100% of my energy, my electricity at my house, being derived from renewable energy resources. It's a choice that we can make with NSTAR.
Just because it's green doesn't mean it's environmentally benign. Cape Wind secured contracts to sell their very high-priced power to two of the major Massachusetts utilities. One's called NSTAR and one's called National Grid, and they pretty much service or provide electricity throughout Massachusetts. So Cape Wind was able to secure high-priced contracts as the result of special legislation that was passed by the Patrick administration.
Sitting on the Conservation Commission, I work very much with anyone along the shoreline, within 100 feet of the shoreline or of any wetland, with any kind of change they want, be it landscape or buildings or whatever. And I'm aware of Save Our Shoreline, Save Our Sound. Yeah. Save Our Sound, SOS. And I'm aware of their funding as well, and the position of our town. Our town has lost 26 battles in court every time they try to put up a roadblock in front of the fulfillment of Cape Wind. They're coming ashore here with their electricity line, so essentially it feeds in Barnstable, and for some reason, I'll tell you it's political, our town continues to throw up a roadblock, a legal roadblock to this.
We are privately funded from the Cape and Islands community, so a lot of fundraising. It's been a very expensive fight on both sides. We have multiple lawsuits going, so working with different law firms on different violations of federal laws, state laws. So one of the lawsuits is challenging Cape Wind's high price contract with NSTAR, and that's at the U.S. Court of Appeals in Boston. So there has been a lot of legal activity, and there continues to be a lot of legal activity, and there will continue to be a lot of legal activity because the project is very controversial, is irresponsibly sited, and it's the result of the developer choosing a location that was technically good for him.
I have suspicions as to the politics of it.
60% of the commercial fishing catch in Nantucket Sound comes from Horseshoe Shoal. That is the area that Cape Wind's targeting. The commercial fishing industry has been very upset about the impact it would have to juvenile fish, the fisheries. I mean, you think about each of these 130 turbines are 18 feet in diameter, so the size of a room, and they would be pile driven 85 feet into the seabed. So clearly it is not without environmental impacts.
Which is why, in part now, they're talking about off our coast to have sanctuaries for the sediments, where it's only hook and line fishery now to be allowed. So that's being considered within the fishing industry. And I think the delaying tactics have tried to wear down the financial resources of the development of this resource, this wind energy resource. There are some extraordinarily wealthy monies that are against this wind farm. I think they're locally based. There has been a suggestion that the Koch brothers are behind some of this. I myself cannot speak to it directly, but it is something that I've heard on a regular basis. I am aware that the Koch brothers are heavily invested in the fossil fuel industry. And so this is a direct threat to the continued dependence of our society on fossil fuels.
Lastly, it's very expensive. Cape Wind's contracts are more than triple that of other green energy, so it would raise electric rates for everyone in Massachusetts, towns, households, and businesses by a total of $3 billion. So it's a massively expensive, inappropriately sited project that should be stopped.
Every time I see a windmill, I see a benefit for the world. So people can have different opinions as to the aesthetics of a windmill. I acknowledge that.
We'll win, and the Cape and Islands community will be very happy.
I know that a big controversy is that, it sounds so superficial, but it's ugly. People don't like having the big, it's kind of an eyesore. So in terms of aesthetics, people don't really like it there.
Cape Wind pushes the turbines as a need for more environmentally friendly energy sources and the wave of the future. However, like most conglomerates, they are financially motivated. Cape Wind's parent company is also working with branches of environmentally unfriendly businesses and corporations.
Jim Gordon, who is the president of Cape Wind, is somebody who's made quite a bit of money in his life on natural gas and on doing other projects in the energy sector.
Even though Energy Management Incorporated's primary goal may not be setting an example and improving the energy predicament, it does not negate the positive effects that the installation of a large-scale wind farm would have locally and nationally.
The benefits far outweigh the negatives. I just think that our world cannot continue on fossil fuel as a major form of energy. It just can't.
As I teach environmental science, I think often about our planet and the health of our planet, and I think that we as a society need to be more concerned about the whole picture and not just our own backyards.
Why not? If we can have a way to improve the environment, let's do it.
In the constant back and forth between Save Our Sound and Cape Wind, many assertions are made. However, in order to find solutions to all problems, questions must also be posed.
there are rich people who don't like the project, and some of their names are fairly well known. Bill Koch is a gentleman whose net worth is said to be somewhere in the tune of $4 billion, who has a home in Osterville, who has been a big opponent of the project, and he's made no bones about that.
Cape Wind is the first offshore wind project in the United States, so the outcome of this project will decide the future of offshore wind in the country. Recent developments have struck a crushing blow against Cape Wind. From the beginning, the Cape Wind project faced difficulties from both the community and contractually with the utilities. While National Grid had willingly volunteered to fund and support the Cape Wind project from the start, NSTAR initially fought against the idea, says Boston Globe associate Shirley Leong. As time passed, they lowered their defenses. Because of NSTAR's interest in merging with Northeastern Utilities, a condition was crafted by Cape Wind. NSTAR would support their project, and in return, would be allowed to go forward with the merge. They then committed to buy over 75% of the energy Cape Wind would produce in the coming years. However, the project's contract specified that the foundation for construction of Cape Wind must begin by January 1st, 2015, a deadline they have been unable to meet. Without contracts with these utilities, the Cape Wind project may well be dead in the water. Even though the Cape Wind project may have been officially suspended as of January 29, 2015, the advancements and arguments have shaped a more hopeful future for wind energy in the United States. Other countries have managed to successfully propose and implement offshore wind. Denmark has led the pack, with the construction of their first offshore wind farm in 1991. Since then, they have successfully implemented over 500 offshore wind turbines spread throughout 13 separate wind farms: Norway, the Netherlands, and Portugal. All in all, the United States has not given up on offshore wind. Deepwater Wind, a 30-megawatt offshore wind farm, has been proposed off the coast of Rhode Island. This project is designated to begin offshore turbine installation in order to be operational by the end of 2016. While there is the ever-present possibility of history repeating itself, this project has the potential to capitalize on the momentum from Cape Wind to establish the first offshore wind farm in the United States of America.